The most decorated cardiac surgeon in Vancouver had not felt her own pulse in 18 months. Dr. Catherine Lowe had everything people spend their lives reaching for. A house on the edge of the cliff in West Vancouver with windows that touched the sky. A reputation that had carried her from St. Paul's Hospital to international conferences in cities she could no longer name without remembering her husband standing beside her. But Daniel was gone, a stroke. 61 years old on a Tuesday, while she was in an operating room saving someone else's husband's heart. After that, the house became a place she slept in. Surgery became something she had retired from too quietly. The city became weather she walked through. Her grief counselor said it plainly. "Catherine, you are existing. You have not started living again." She almost said, "Tell me the difference and make me believe it." That February evening, the cold off Burrard Inlet had teeth in it. Catherine walked through Pacific Central Station alone, her charcoal coat buttoned to the throat, her gloved hands doing nothing useful at her sides. She wasn't catching a train. She hadn't been going anywhere in months. She walked the way grief walks, without destination, because destination implies a future, and futures were still something she had to be talked back into believing in. The station was full of winter light and noise, families pulling luggage, students in headphones, a man selling flowers near the east entrance calling out to nobody in particular. Christmas had passed, but the city still hadn't put it all the way down. Then she heard running, small feet, frantic. A child slammed into her so hard Catherine stepped back half a pace, thin arms wrapped around her coat, a face pressed against her chest, and a voice barely above a whisper said 6 words that tore a clean line through 18 months of silence. "Please, tell them you know me." Catherine looked down. A girl, 9, maybe 10, though hunger made it hard to be certain. Dark braided hair, half undone, wet at the ends. A winter jacket 2 sizes too small, the zipper broken, held shut by a safety pin someone had threaded through the fabric. Her sneakers were soaked. She was shaking so hard it moved through Catherine's coat. Her eyes were brown and enormous and terrified. Not the way children are frightened by a bad dream. The way children are frightened when they know what is coming, and have learned that no one comes quickly enough. Over the girl's shoulder, Catherine saw a man moving fast through the crowd, heavyset, wearing a parka with a fur-trimmed hood, his face red from the cold or from anger. He wasn't calling out, he was hunting, quiet and deliberate, the kind of search a person does when they do not want witnesses. "Please," the girl whispered again, "he's coming." Catherine was not a woman who made emotional decisions. 30 years in a surgical theater will strip the sentiment from most situations and replace it with precision. She asked herself, "What do I know?" A frightened child, an adult approaching with no urgency to be seen, no one else stepping forward. Then the girl said one more thing, her voice cracking at the edges. "I can't let him take me back, Cora is still there." Catherine wrapped her arm around the girl's shoulders, and pulled her close. "There you are," she said, loudly enough for the man now 5 meters away to hear. "I've been looking everywhere." The man slowed. Catherine turned toward him, positioning her body between him and the child. She was tall. She had stood at the head of operating tables for 3 decades, and learned to make her presence felt without raising her voice. "Is there a problem?" His eyes moved from her to the girl, calculating. "That kid is with me," she ran off. "She came to me," Catherine said. "Look, lady." "She came to me," Catherine repeated. Her voice was the voice she used when an anesthesiologist wanted to argue dosage, and she knew she was right. It left no room for a second opinion. The man looked at the girl's face against Catherine's coat, at the arm around her shoulders, at the way the child had not moved a single inch toward him despite being within arm's reach. He stepped back, said something under his breath, moved away into the crowd. Only then did the girl's grip slowly loosen, but she did not let go. "Thank you," she whispered. Catherine held her still, one hand warm on the back of her head, and for the first time in 18 months felt something move in her chest that was not grief. Her name was Zoe, she was 9 years old. She told Catherine this in a food court near the station, sitting across a small table with a bowl of soup she ate too fast, not greedily, but with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned not to trust that the bowl would stay full. Catherine watched her and said very little. She had spent a career knowing when to let a body tell its own story. "The man," Catherine said carefully. "Who is he?" Zoe's spoon stopped. "Raymond Gould, he's our foster carer." Our Catherine filed that word away. "Who is Cora?" Zoe looked up for the first time without fear in her eyes, only something older and heavier than fear. "She's 6, she's been with me for 8 months. Since the placement." A pause. "Since our parents died." Catherine's chest tightened. "Both of you lost your parents." Zoe shook her head slowly. "Not together. Cora's mom died last year, car accident. She doesn't have other family." She looked down at the soup. "My mom and dad died 2 winters ago, house fire. I got out, they didn't." The station noise fell away around Catherine. She heard this the way she heard the moment a patient's monitor changed pitch. Every other sound in the world reduced to irrelevance. "You got out alone?" she asked quietly. Zoe nodded. "The window in the back bedroom. My dad always said if there's fire, go low and find air, so I went low." She said it the way children say things they have had to say too many times, flat, practiced, the emotion worn smooth by repetition. "I ended up at Raymond Gould's placement 3 months later. Cora was already there." "And Cora," Catherine said carefully. "What happens to her there?" Zoe's hands came off the table and into her lap. "He locks the back room when he's angry. He calls it a cool-down space." She did not look up. "But Cora gets scared in the dark. She cries. When she cries, he keeps her there longer." Catherine breathed slowly, the way she did before making an incision, before the place where there was no room for hesitation. "Why were you running today?" "I heard him on the phone." Zoe's voice dropped so low Catherine had to lean in. "A family wants to take Cora, only Cora. Raymond said it works out better for him. Younger kids get placed faster, then he gets a new placement and the money resets." She looked up. "I don't care what happens to me. But Cora thinks I'm her family. She doesn't sleep without me next to her. She asks me to tell her stories so the dark feels smaller." Catherine stared at the girl across the table. Small, rain-damp, speaking about abandonment with the composure of someone who had been failed by adults too many times to afford the luxury of falling apart, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not pity, purpose. "Zoe," she said, "I'm going to help you, both of you." Zoe looked at her with eyes that had learned to doubt that sentence. "You don't know us." "No," Catherine said. "But I know what it looks like when someone is not safe, and I have spent 30 years making sure people who are not safe become safe." She reached across the table slowly. "The way you approach a small animal that has been hurt. I am not going to promise you something I cannot do, but I promise you I will try." For a long moment Zoe only watched her. Then she looked down at the table and said very quietly, "She counts my fingers when she's scared, 1 to 10. Then back again. She says it helps her remember I'm real." Something broke open in Catherine's chest. Not the clean break of a surgical incision, the other kind. Priya Shankar arrived at Catherine's house in West Vancouver by 9 o'clock. Coat still buttoned from the cold, her laptop bag over one shoulder, and the expression she wore when a case required both urgencies and precision. She had been Catherine's closest friend for 11 years and her family lawyer for 3. She sat at the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and did not ask unnecessary questions. Zoe sat on the sofa with a blanket Catherine had pulled from the linen closet. Stopped shaking. She watched Catherine and Priya the way children watch adults they are not yet sure they can trust. Close attention, still body, ready to run. "I need an emergency welfare check on a child named Cora," Catherine told Priya. "Currently in the care of a man named Raymond Gould." She gave the address Zoe had written on a corner of napkin. Priya began typing. "On what grounds?" "Confinement, emotional abuse, possible financial fraud on the foster placement system." Catherine looked at Zoe, and the testimony of the only person in that house who has been paying attention. Priya looked up at the girl. "Hi Zoe," she said, not with the brightness adults perform for children. Straight and plain and respectful. "Can you tell me the things you've seen? We're going to write it down. You won't be in trouble." Zoe sat forward. She put her hands flat on her knees and she began. She told them about the locked room. About food left outside the door on days Cora had been difficult, which was the word Raymond Gould used for frightened. About the bruise on Cora's upper arm that he said was from a fall. And the way Cora went very still when adults raised their voices. The particular stillness of a child who had learned that stillness was safer than movement. About the phone call Zoe had overheard 3 days ago. A voice on the other end, brisk and businesslike, confirming a family visit, and Raymond's reply, "Yeah, just the little one, the older one's too much work, I'll cycle her back into the system." When Zoe finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Priya closed her laptop. "I'm filing for an emergency welfare check tonight and a report to the ministry." She looked at Catherine. "It may not be fast." "Make it fast," Catherine said. Priya's eyes softened. "Catherine." "Priya." Catherine's voice was steady and quiet. "That child is 6 years old. Make it fast." They reached Raymond Gould's house in East Vancouver the following morning. Catherine, Priya, and 2 ministry workers who had been persuaded, through a combination of Priya's legal pressure and Catherine's unnerving calm, that this warranted same-day response. Raymond Gould opened the door in a fleece vest and made the mistake of smiling. His eyes moved past Priya to Catherine, whom he did not recognize, then to Zoe standing slightly behind Catherine's arm, and his expression shifted into something controlled and thin. "I see you found my placement." "We found Zoe," Catherine said. Raymond blinked. "I don't know who you are, but this is a formal placement matter and I'd ask you to." "I'd like to see Cora," Catherine said, not a question. The ministry workers showed their credentials. Raymond's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Inside, the house smelled of takeout containers, and laundry left wet too long. Children's drawings were tacked to a corkboard near the stairs, the corners curling. They looked as though someone had put them there to make the place look inhabited by something warmer than it was. One of the workers asked for Cora. Raymond said she was resting. In her room, the worker asked. A pause in the quiet space. Zoe's hand found the back of Catherine's coat. Catherine didn't look down, she just reached back and placed her hand over the girl's. The quiet space was a room off the kitchen, with a latch on the outside of the door. The latch was closed. The ministry worker opened it. Cora was sitting on the floor against the far wall, knees drawn up, arms around herself, her face pressed against her own shoulder. She was so small she seemed to take up almost no space at all. When the door opened and light came in, she flinched hard and pressed herself further into the corner. Then she heard Zoe's voice. Cora, it's me, I'm here. The little girl looked up. Her eyes were red, her face was swollen from crying. She stared at Zoe for one long second, the way you stare at something you've been told you cannot have. Then she scrambled across the floor and into Zoe's arms. The sound she made was not a word. It was just the sound of a child who had been holding her breath for too long. Zoe held her with both arms and rocked her and said over and over, I came back, I told you I would, I'm not leaving you. Catherine stood in the doorway and did not move. She could not have moved if someone had asked her to. Behind her she heard Priya's voice, very quiet and very precise, informing Raymond Gould that both children were being removed from his care pending a full investigation, and that he had the right to contact his own counsel. Raymond Gould said something about procedure and paperwork. Catherine turned around to look at him. She did not speak for a moment. You locked a 6-year-old in a dark room, she said, because she cried for her sister. Raymond's mouth opened. Don't, Catherine said. He closed it again. The weeks that followed moved through legal channels at a pace that was neither fast enough nor slow enough, always exactly as fast as dread. Priya filed, the ministry investigated. Raymond Gould's finances were reviewed and a pattern emerged. 4 previous placements cycled through in less than 2 years. Each closed before the children could establish themselves. Each generating placement fees that were never fully accounted for. Zoe sat in Catherine's house and waited, because waiting was what she had learned to do best. Cora slept in the spare room with the nightlight on, and every morning she counted Zoe's fingers before breakfast, 1 to 10. Then back again. Catherine watched this and thought about the 18 months she had spent inside her own silence, and felt the silence shifting. She did not make the decision to apply for guardianship the way she had made surgical decisions, with clear data and measurable outcomes. She made it the way she had made the decision to marry Daniel, standing in the kitchen of their first apartment in Kitsilano, with paint still on her hands from the wall they'd just done together. Not because she had reasoned her way to certainty, but because walking away had stopped being thinkable. Priya filed the application in March. The hearing was set for May. The courtroom was not large, but it held more weight than its size suggested. Social workers, a guardian ad litem appointed for both girls, the ministry representative, Priya at the front table, her files stacked with the precision she brought to everything. Catherine sat beside Zoe, Cora sat beside Zoe on the other side, her hand inside her sister's as always. Raymond Gould was present, his own lawyer at his elbow, but something had gone out of him in the months since the investigation began. The confidence he had worn at his front door, the easy authority of a man who has never been seriously questioned, was gone. He looked smaller, more ordinary, the way wrongdoing looks once the paperwork catches up to it. Judge Ann Kwan reviewed the submissions carefully and without expression. She asked several questions. She listened. Then she looked at Zoe. I understand you wanted to say something to this court, Judge Kwan said. You have that right. Zoe stood. She was wearing a navy cardigan Catherine had bought her, and she stood in it the way she stood in everything, straight, even when she was frightened, even when the room was full of adults whose decisions would determine the rest of her life. She looked at Raymond Gould first. The courtroom stilled. I used to think I did something wrong, she said. Her voice was clear and younger than the words coming out of it. I thought that was why things kept being hard. That I was the problem. She paused. But I wasn't the problem. I was just a kid trying to keep my sister from being scared alone in the dark, and I want you to know that I know the difference now. Raymond Gould looked at the table in front of him. I'm not going to say I forgive you, Zoe continued. She said it plainly, without cruelty. Because I'm 9 and I don't think I'm supposed to know how to do that yet, but I'm not angry either. I just don't want to give you any more of my time. She glanced down at Cora, who was watching her with both hands pressed against her knees. I have better things to spend it on. Catherine's throat ached. Judge Kwan looked at her notes for a moment, and when she looked up again her voice was quiet. This court finds the application for permanent guardianship to be in the best interest of both children. She looked at Catherine. Dr. Lowe, these girls are fortunate to have found you. Catherine thought about the station, the cold, the small arms wrapped around her coat. I found them, she said. Or we found each other, I'm not sure it matters which. The house in West Vancouver, which had been silent for so long the silence had started to feel structural, like a wall Catherine had learned to live inside, was not silent anymore. There were shoes by the front door that were not hers. A drawing of 3 people standing in front of a house taped to the refrigerator, with a caption in careful printed letters, "Our family." A nightlight plugged in at the end of the upstairs hallway, casting a small warm circle on the floor for a child, who had learned to love the dark a little less each week. Zoe still woke up some nights reaching for her sister. Cora still asked, some mornings, whether anything could take them away. And Catherine, for the first time since standing in the hospital corridor being told that her husband was gone, understood that living again was not a decision you made once. It was a decision you made every morning, small acts. Making breakfast, leaving the light on, opening the door. She established a fund, small at first and then not small, to support children in the province's care system whose placements were under review, legal resources, independent advocates, the particular kind of adult who shows up when the system has looked away. She called it the Cora and Zoe Initiative, because Cora and Zoe had asked if they could name it, and she had said yes before the question was fully finished. Some evenings, when the city lights reflected off the water below, and the house held the sound of 2 children breathing, Catherine thought about the February evening at Pacific Central Station. The cold, the noise, the girl who had run toward a stranger and asked to be seen. She had walked into that station empty. She had not walked out that way. There is a particular kind of rescue that works in both directions at once, that finds the person reaching down and pulls them back from somewhere they had not admitted they were falling. You do not plan for it. You cannot schedule it or prepare. It arrives at the wrong time, in the wrong season, in the form of someone smaller than you and braver than you, and desperately in need of the exact thing you forgot you still had to give. Catherine had spent 18 months learning how to be lost. She had not known she was also learning how to be found.